Hi, welcome to this Tao Center event, an all-class lecture at Columbia Journalism School. I'm Ann Cooper, Taylor Owen, right here of the Tao Center, and I edited the report that we're launching here tonight on the new global journalism. We actually stole the name from one of my classes, and I have to credit this because some of them are here tonight. Some of the students who worked on a project called the New Global Journalism 2 years ago. Year and a half ago. And that was kind of a springboard for a lot more research and this report that we have. I'm guessing some of you know the film The Foreign Correspondent. Came out in 1940, starred a guy named Joel McCrea. He was swashbuckling around the world in his trench coat and carrying his little reporter's notebook around. And nothing less than world peace hinged on how well he did his job. You know, he was a mashup, he was a stereotype, but like many stereotypes, there were some elements of truth in that Joel McCrea foreign correspondent character. Foreign correspondents don't necessarily go out and save the world, but for decades they've worked in news organizations that believed it was important to spend the money to send people out, to send good reporters abroad, to be there, to be eyewitnesses, and to report back to all the rest of us about what was happening in the world. And all the rest of us depended on those foreign correspondents for news, for analysis, as a window onto the world because otherwise, without them, you know, how were we going to know what was going on? But big surprise here, digital technology has disrupted that foreign correspondent model. How did that happen? Well, first of all, when there's a big breaking news story today, what do we all do? We look online, we're on Twitter, we're on Facebook, we find videos, pictures, text information, directly from that scene. Some of the reports that we're looking at may be from traditional foreign correspondents, but these days, if you've got a cell phone and internet access, you can report to anybody else in the world about the scene that you're seeing if you're right there on the scene at a breaking news event. Second, foreign correspondents, of course, also have access to those same tools that ordinary citizens have, and that enables them to report on some events, and particularly breaking news, without always physically being there, the way that Joel McCrea had to be there all the time in that movie Foreign Correspondent. So these two changes are happening at the same time that digital technology has put so much financial pressure on mainstream media, and that has led to another big change, legacy news organizations shutting down their traditional foreign bureaus. So a lot of that sounds like bad news for international journalism, right? Maybe. If you are stuck looking at the old model as the only way to go. But you can also look forward, and that's what we have tried to do in this Tao Center report. The new Global Journalism, Foreign Correspondents in Transition is written by 5 authors, and I'm very happy to say that 4 of them are alums of this school, and one of them is currently a Ph.D. student here. All 5 of them are out working in this changed world, and we've asked them to give their perspectives on how these changes have affected global journalism, the work of the foreign correspondent, reporting on international events. We've also asked them to give us guidance in the report about how journalists can maintain the highest reporting standards and keep public trust while operating in these new conditions. So let me tell you about our authors. Kelly Niknejad is the founder of Tehran Bureau. It's a digital native news site that she created in her parents' living room after she graduated from here. Tehran Bureau has grown and evolved and now offers a model for how to report long distance and from the scene about a particular place, Iran, where it's impossible for correspondents to operate freely on the ground. Ahmed Omran is another J School grad. Before he came here, he blogged at Saudi Jeans. It was an English language site that he ran by himself. Then he came to J School. Then he worked for National Public Radio during the Arab uprisings in 2011. and he's now a correspondent based in Riyadh for the Wall Street Journal, where he uses many of the digital reporting techniques that he writes about in the Tao Report. J-School grad Jessie Graham was a reporter for public radio, including reporting from abroad, until she decided to join Human Rights Watch. She is senior multimedia producer there, and in her chapter of the Tao Report, she tells us about important shifts in the relationship between journalists and advocacy groups. And Burcu Baykurt is a Ph.D. student here. She's worked with 140 journos. That's the kind of odd name of a citizen media operation in Turkey that probably enjoys more public trust than much of the mainstream media in the country today. Burcu's written for us about how journalists can report securely and independently in the digital age. Our fifth author, Anoop Kafle, could not join us. He's digital foreign editor at the Washington Post, also a J-School grad, and he's written about, in the report, about the traditional foreign desk in transition. He's out of the country this week, but we will make sure that Anoop gets here at some point this year to talk with our students again, as he often does. And with that, I want to turn this over to our academic dean, Sheila Coronel.
Good evening, everybody. This is our second all-class lecture for the year. A few weeks ago, we did our all-class lecture on After Foley, the threats to freelancers and other journalists working in conflict areas. Today, we're going to talk about how digital technology and social media are changing the way we do international reporting. We're going to look at, what is being reported, how it's being reported, why it's being reported, who's funding it, what are the challenges of this new landscape, and how these new international reporters engage and involve their audiences in their reporting. Let me just say that all of them have a journalism school connection. And before we proceed, I'd like to have a word from our sponsor. We have a person from our admissions office here who will be ready to answer your questions about our programs here at the journalism school. Can that person raise? Yes. Over at the back. So this year, about 40% of our students here at Columbia come from overseas. And international reporting is a big part of what we do here at the journalism school. So to start off with, I'd like to ask each of the members of our panel here to talk about their own journey, how you got here, and how your use of digital technology and everything changed the way you're doing reporting, and how you're being, as we told our students at the beginning of the school year, people who come to the J School not only will be taught how to do journalism, but they will also be reinventing journalism in this new era. So how was it that you came about, with what you've learned and what your previous experience has been, how you came about doing very new things in journalism? Maybe we should start from that end of the panel.
Sure.
Yes, Jessie.
Yeah.
Yes.
Well, the transition that I made from working as a journalist to Human Rights Watch, that's the biggest transition I've made. I've been at Human Rights Watch for 6 years. In a way, it was a very smooth one because I was already covering international development, human rights, post-conflict reconstruction. That's what I had started to do as a foreign correspondent, as a freelancer mostly, and also as a staffer. But, it really, there came a time when I was struggling as a freelancer, kind of between a good staff job and maybe another one, and watching this whole world change, watching the little resources that there were that all the freelancers were competing for beginning to really dry up, and this is, even maybe like 8 years ago. And this vision that I had of being this swashbuckling foreign correspondent that Anne was talking about, maybe it was still in reach. Maybe there were a few jobs like that, and maybe I could hold out for that. But I began to realize that maybe there were other things that I could be doing that would push me, as someone who was a radio and print reporter, to really open up and be able to do different kinds of reporting, different kinds of producing. So actually, I found a home in a place I didn't expect to, in the nonprofit world. And when I was struggling, my parents would say to me, "Why don't you go work in PR?" And this was like the, the worst thing that anyone could say to me as someone who was so committed to journalism. It was really my dream to be doing the work that I was doing. And yet, it really began to sort of open up in a new way when, everyone's telling their story suddenly, right? Which can be difficult to sort of suss out, well, where's the journalism in that? If everyone can just be a broadcaster, then, where's the true story? Where's the story that's vetted and has the analysis that we want? So I think I had a really unique opportunity to move into a place where there's this documentary tradition.
To do things that would otherwise not be funded by news organization,
Exactly.
right? To do more in-depth reporting that you're doing now.
Yeah.
Ahmed, you sort of went into the reverse trajectory. You started out as a blogger going to the mainstream, whereas Jessie started from the mainstream going into an advocacy and human rights organization.
Yeah, I mean, if Jessie's parents didn't wanted her to leave journalism and go into PR, my parents didn't even want me to get into journalism because they thought it was such a dangerous field to be in and not very, you can't make a living as a journalist in Saudi Arabia. So I ended up going and studying pharmacy in undergrad because that's what my parents wanted. But I started the blog when I was in college, and the blog really took off and got a lot of interest that I didn't expect. And that's where I decided that, no, journalism is the field that I want to be in. So after graduation from my undergrad degree with pharmacy, I came here to the J School, and I learned, traditional reporting, but also all the digital skills that I needed to use after graduation. And after I left the school, I went and worked at NPR, covering the Arab Spring, mainly using social media sources. And it was challenging, but it was also a very interesting place to be because NPR was one of the few places that were willing to experiment and let their journalists try new things that, many other organizations were not willing to do. To let the journalists use their Twitter accounts as tools for reporting and broadcasting news. So I did a year with NPR, and then I went back to Saudi Arabia, and it wasn't easy finding work because of the changes in journalism. A lot of the international organizations that would typically have hired foreign correspondents in the past are not doing that anymore. There were fewer and fewer foreign correspondents in the region, and the ones that were there were mainly in the areas where you had conflict and wars. So the Gulf, did not have that, and it didn't get the interest from these organizations. So actually, when I got back and I couldn't find work, I started a website called Riyadh Bureau, kind of inspired by what Kelly did with the Tehran Bureau. And I did that for almost 1 year before landing this job with the journal. So, I think many people would say I had very unusual or atypical career so far, but I don't think of it that way. I think for me it came very naturally because I think it all makes sense in a way because that's where I wanted to be eventually. I didn't take the most typical path, but eventually it led to where I wanted to be.
Thank you. Kelly?
I had no idea. Can you hear me? I had no idea what journalism was because I grew up in Iran. I was 17 when I left, and the closest thing, my understanding of journalism was a very young, photogenic woman in her 20s paired with a guy in his 50s reading the news that has been given to them, prepared magically somehow, probably by the government. So I went into law school, and I was an attorney. I was writing a book, and I just by accident, to support my writing, took a job covering courts for a news agency in San Diego, and I fell in love with it. I didn't even know. So I was I worked my way from the very bottom. I covered courts, and I was an attorney, so people told me back, this is still when new media hadn't come into the picture, that I wasn't a real journalist because of the things, I should be covering everything. So I tried to cover everything. I would cover the police beat at night. I would fill in for the city reporter. I'd go cover police, school shootings, anything that came up. I would write about music for the newspaper, and then I decided to be a general assignment reporter, moved to Massachusetts, very small newspaper, Martha's Vineyard, and after 9/11 happened, I decided I really wanted to cover Iran, but before then I didn't want to be pigeonholed as an Iranian woman, that's all I know, Iran. But after 9/11, I really, really wanted to cover Iran. I'd lived both there in Iran and in the United States before the revolution, during the revolution, and after the revolution, so I felt like I could be a good bridge between these two cultures. And nobody wanted to hire me to do that. The LA Times, which was the closest newspaper, the largest community of Iranians were living in Los Angeles, and I thought that would be a good, and they were like, you're too much of a minority to be a minority for us to take you in a program where we take mid-career students, mid-career professionals and train them to be journalists. So, we're not interested. And so I got frustrated by, basically I got very frustrated. Everywhere I went, I felt like these great journalists who I looked up to that were very sophisticated when it came to Washington, D.C. or New York or Los Angeles, or when it came to places like the Middle East, when it came to Iran, they were duped very easily. And the reporting that was coming out was incredibly flawed. And anyway, so I decided, because I was much older when I got into journalism, that I wasn't going to land one of those internships that's going to give me a shortcut to the kind of reporting that I wanted to do. I worked in as many places as I could and got the experience, came to the J School, specialized in newspapers, went to Time Magazine, and decided when the new program here started on the MA, specializing in politics, to do that. And by that point, I had a lot of confidence, and I wanted to do whatever I wanted to do, and nobody could tell me like it was a bad idea, because everybody thinks it's a really bad idea. So I got as much experience as I could, and then finally, when I couldn't get funding to start Tehran Bureau, I moved back to Boston and just launched it on Blogspot from my parents' living room, and as Anne said, and it was a success from the start, because I think I was the first to do it, and because I had a lot of journalism, I had journalism experience and education behind me, so what I was doing, whether it was on Twitter or anywhere else, it differed from everybody, the masses that were also trying to do it. And to me, it's just common sense that it's, the tools that we have available is just kind of a very more sophisticated version of having a phone and being able to pick up a phone and call somebody who's far away. So it's just easier way, cheaper way of being in touch with a lot of people and taking advantage of the fact that you can do that kind of thing.
Burcu?
So I'm the odd one here. I'm not a journalist. I've never done professional journalism. And it's funny because I was talking with a friend of mine like half an hour ago, and they were asking me, what are you doing at a journalism school? Really, we didn't know that you were interested in journalism. But funny enough, until I was 20 years old, I had desperately wanted to be a journalist in Turkey. And as some of you may know, the Turkish media environment is incredibly censored. To be a professional journalist in Turkey is really hard. So I lost my interest when I was, in my second or third year in college, and did a bunch of other things that are totally unrelated. But then after some experience in working in private sector NGOs, I had these burning questions about journalism and its relation to politics and journalistic freedom, which made me come back to the academia. And right before I started at the journalism school, my Ph.D., in that summer I met the folks who founded 140 Journos. This is a counter-media movement in Turkey. When I met them, I felt like I finally met the people who have the same concerns and who really want to practice journalism, but they just can't do it. And instead of me at the time who was trying to find a way to get into institutional journalism, these, I'm going to call them kids because they're younger than me, were just like using their phones and iPads and covering news stories. And we just clicked. And now I've been working with them for about 2 years now. And we are really, we think we're doing something radical in the sense that we're trying to distribute journalism as a practice to people, which makes me, question many of the things that people practice in newsrooms, like on the ground, but from a totally different perspective.
So this is a panel that marks the launching of this new report. I'm sure you guys have it, and it's going to be online. And the first story is Kelly's story that's out now in the Columbia Journalism Review website. But it's a set of sort of case studies on how foreign correspondence or reporting overseas has changed. And one of the biggest changes, as Anne mentioned, is the importance of being there. So is it really important to be there? I mean, Kelly, I think you are a prime example of, and Ahmed as well, of what you can do by not being there, right? I mean, we are all products of the bad movies we've seen. I've seen Rome on Holiday, and we're also a swashbuckling foreign correspondent, and what's that other movie? Love is a Many Splendid Thing, another swashbuckling foreign correspondent, all male, by the way, and as you can see, gender is one difference in this new landscape. It's no longer an all-male swashbuckling thing, but the other thing is the importance of being there. And I'd like you to address this question, Kelly first and then Ahmed, and then maybe afterwards Jessie, because you still put primary importance in being there on the field. Right?
One word on gender, the men are still getting the funding. But I think we are there. And unfortunately, I'm not doing a lot of the reporting because I'm not there.
Well, you are reporting about Iran from London, or you were from Massachusetts, right?
Yes, but the thing is, most of our reporters are in Iran, and it's not that different from someone filing a story, to their editors in New York and London. Okay, it's not that different than filing a story from Tehran or Damascus and having an editor looking at it in London or in New York, which is, and I think, in the beginning I did set out to let's do the story from here because we don't have to censor ourselves. We don't have to calculate if I want to get a visa 2 years from now or 2 months from now. Let's, be careful. So not having to do that just took a lot of the strain and a lot of the obstacles, inherent in reporting from that region out of the way. And after a while, because of new media, I found myself with such a rich network of people who are inside the country that at one point it was the work was being done there, was being edited there, was being fact-checked there, was being translated there, and they don't know each other. And I think that's very important because I'm the one common denominator, and so everything goes through me, even if it goes back to Tehran.
So you have a network of correspondents who are unnamed and don't know each other,
Yeah.
and even you don't know who they are.
Of course I know who they are.
Okay.
Yeah, I definitely know who they are. I would know.
And how do you know that they're
There's
accurate and truthful?
There's a beautiful epic story behind everyone that I use, and I think everyone has come through in a very different way. But I think, just to give an example, instead of going to every single story and blowing the identity of people or boring everyone, when we went from Frontline, that nobody in Iran, most people hadn't heard of, to The Guardian, which everyone had heard of, and there was all of a sudden an influx of people who wanted to report for us because they wanted to be in The Guardian. Then I had a problem because they had people coming with a story that I didn't necessarily trust, even though they were introduced to me by someone who was a journalist who had been trained in journalism in New York. I still didn't trust it, so I had the luxury of going to someone else who I'd been working for many years and said, can you please also report the story? And it turned out that the story was right, and through his additional reporting, there was much more interesting context and nuances and additional facts that wouldn't have been there if I had focus. So I combine the stories, as a lot of times you do. You have one person, and then you have contributing reporters from here and there and there. But the thing is, when you specialize in one particular topic or one particular country, after a while, you have so many people that you know. You can, if I get something on an issue that I'm not sure about, I can call, I can email someone and say, what do you think of this? Is this correct? Is this accurate? Or have something on drugs fact-checked by somebody who is a scientist, who also knows Iran, who's also, so it's very convenient. It just all falls into place.
So Ahmed, Kelly has a network of correspondents who are sort of secret correspondents overseas whom she may or may not know but trusts. How is your work similar or different?
Well, I think being there is important, and it is something that I always wanted to do, and I am doing right now by being in the country. But I also think at the same time that technology and social media has allowed us to do a lot more, even if you're not right there in the location. So Kelly got to meet a lot of her correspondents through social media, and without even being there and meeting them in person. And they became, her network and the people that she works with. I think it is very important because social media and technology has become so ingrained in our life and the way many political and social movements function that we must understand it and use it to report on these changes. At the same time, doing that sometime without being there actually can give you an advantage, because if you are a reporter in the middle of a protest, you're only going to see the corner where you are in, okay? And there's so much going on in a location like Tahrir Square, for example. But if you're watching the Tahrir Square sit-in on Twitter, you will see the different people and the different protesters and different locations inside that protest saying what's happening. Now, with this advantage comes challenges. How do you verify? Do you trust these people? How do you deal with that information? How do you use it in your reporting? These are challenges that we're still tackling, we're dealing with. Some of them have become easier over time. But it definitely gives the reporter an advantage that, yes, it's important to be there and meet the people yourself and do the reporting as we have always done. But at the same time, you can't discount how important the internet and social media has become for everything that happens around us. And in some places, like Saudi Arabia, for example, Saudi has the most Twitter users by capita in the world. So a lot of the social and political discourse that doesn't happen in traditional media because it's censored happens on Twitter. So if you're not following that, if you're not part of it, your reporter is missing a lot. So it becomes important and an essential part of your reporting. So I think ideally you want both. You want to be there, but you also want to take advantage of all the good things and the bad things that comes with reporting using social media and new technology.
Jessie, your thoughts on this?
Well, coming at it from within Human Rights Watch, I guess, or looking at, I guess one group that is there, maybe, especially in an emergency situation, maybe the advocacy groups like Amnesty International or Human Rights Watch, MSF, in some cases, Doctors Without Borders. So it's an interesting position to be in when maybe there aren't foreign correspondents on the ground. In a place like the Central African Republic, for instance, in the past few months, we've been in situations where we've been on the ground, but there aren't very many foreign correspondents or news reporters. So again, it's the tweets that become very valuable, and that like quick turnaround stuff that that reporters are doing. Then we're doing that, and then that gets picked up by the news media as well.
So isn't there a danger here? One, how do you verify that what social media says is true? And the other is, aren't you sort of in an echo chamber where you just reflect people's opinions as expressed in social media, what people are saying in social media, when there's, especially in many of the countries you're talking about, Central African Republic, parts of the Middle East, parts of Iran, a lot of people are not on social media, right?
I think over time you develop your techniques to deal with that. to develop sources, to make sure that you can verify the information you find there. I think one of the big problems that happened during the Iranian Revolution in 2009, for example, is that there were very few people tweeting from Iran, and there was a lot of people tweeting about it from outside, just repeating whatever they were hearing or seeing or reading elsewhere. And I think that to a certain degree, there was less of that during the Arab Spring because we had more people tweeting from the ground. And there are people that, we came to know as activists or protesters that we know they're not, anonymous people who are just tweeting things and saying they're there. We know that they are there because we know these people. So there is the risk of that, but I think there has been some, let's say, growing up or a maturity in how we approach the information and the news reporting, news and social media from the Iranian Revolution in 2009 until where we are today. Part of it is because we as reporters and observers have become more, give it more scrutiny and deal with it better. And also because activists and people on the ground have come to understand these tools better and how to use them.
So verification is a very important part of the journalist's job. How do you do that with this new digital era? What are the tools that you use? What criteria, what standards do you use for verifying information? Burcu.
I think there is a lot of information that is being built as we speak. Like there are so many things that people don't know. But I think one thing is that we try to do in Turkey is to make sure that the tweets that we curate are coming from the ground. Like really basic things like turning on your location when you're tweeting. It makes a huge difference for someone who's sitting in front of a screen and trying to sift through thousands of tweets. Having a visual, a photograph or a video that supports the claim that's being made. And I think one of the good things about the social media is you try to cultivate these networks in which you can really just sometimes, I think it was in Ahmed's chapter, you just pick up the phone and you establish these relations, and if you can't really figure out, you Googled it, you try to, search for it online and you can't find it, and then you just pick up the phone and you become sort of friends with these people who really want to help you get the news out there. So it's, I think it's a technical process, but it's also a very social process.
So using traditional journalistic methods to verify information, like actually picking up the phone and talking to humans as opposed to just looking in their Twitter feeds. Are there other ways in which you verify? What are Human Rights Watch's standards? How do you decide whether to report on something or not?
Well, we're using a lot of the same techniques as journalists in that, when something like the Rabah massacre is happening in Egypt, we are tweeting and we're making sure that we get on with broadcasters, or our researcher there is even filing little audio reports or little videos at the moment when the military is moving in on these protesters and killing them. And so we're broadcasting that at the moment.
Broadcasting that on the basis of what people are saying in Twitter or what's posted in YouTube?
A little bit. There may be, our researchers are more and more, and the researchers, Human Rights Watch works with this network of, there are employees. That the researcher is sort of the reporter of this human rights organization, and they're documenting human rights abuses around the world. So someone who's covering Egypt is going to be there. They're going to be there, but they're also going to be extremely hooked into that network that Ahmed is also hooked into. Right. But then there's a year, maybe, if it's that kind of massacre, of documentation that goes on after that, of interviewing every witness that you can get your hands on, of reconstructing the timeline of how the government planned that. So it's layers.
So it's part of a continuum. When news is breaking, you're reporting it based on someone on the ground and information from social media and others, and then you go back and then re-report based on.
And one more thing that's becoming more and more, and I think you're probably using this too, is satellite images. that's becoming, and I think satellite images, everyone thinks, oh, well, there it is, there's the smoking gun, but it's actually a lot, you need a lot of verification and a lot of voices from the
For example,
ground.
satellite images to show what?
Oh, to show, well, in some cases it's more like featurey projects that we're doing, like, the Chinese government says that it's not forcibly relocating Tibetans from Tibetan villages, and then it's providing that, and we might try to map over time, well, what did these villages look like before, and where are these people living now, because we can't get in there. So in closed countries, in the Syrian conflict, it's been, we've done a lot of satellite imagery that we've been able to verify, and actually more and more, what I find interesting is more and more people are impugning themselves online. So it's sort of I don't know, it's like Goebbels or something. I mean, it's like, I think of the Nazis like documenting their abuses. I mean, people are...
The Islamic State is a good example, right?
I'm sorry?
The Islamic State, for example.
Yeah, they're documenting their abuses.
Yeah.
The rebels in Syria have been doing a great job of documenting some killings, of civilians.
But Kelly, I'm curious because, the traditional journalist way of doing things is first you identify your sources, and second you get the other side. I mean, Tehran Bureau obviously doesn't have access to officials in Iran, and, and how do you attribute? I mean, I'm thinking of an editor saying, according to the tweet of someone. I mean, is that enough attribution?
I don't think we've ever attributed anything to a tweet.
Okay.
I don't think I've even ever tweeted something from somebody I don't know, really. So, no, I mean, the other side, which is the government, does a great job of letting everyone know what it thinks. It's all out there. It's just, they're obsessed with media. They're all over cyberspace. You can go to, they have dozens, if not hundreds of news organizations and websites, and so what they think is all out there. And I think we do a very good job of making sure that we get the other side. So I think that's been like the least of our issues, trying to get the other sides.
What about the problem of anonymity? I mean, how do you expect people to believe you if you can't say who your sources are?
If we're doing a story, we name as many sources as any other news organization does. For example, if we want to use an expert, I might call someone from Tehran so that they associate the reporter with me, and then I will take that reporting and give it to our reporter in Iran or somebody who's not named. Plus, I think that the quality of the journalism is so much higher than anything else coming out of Iran or being written about Iran, that it speaks for itself. I mean, the way we covered the election in 2009, its aftermath, and the way we covered this election, this last president, I think we're the only place that got it right. Everybody else who had access was saying that this fundamentalist Jambi was going to be the front runner. You could see it in the New York Times, the Christian Science Monitor, every news organization, because that was the narrative. And we were the only ones covering other candidates and giving more background and covering it from the ground up, and so we turned out to be correct. So again, I think the journalism speaks for itself, and we do have as much sourcing as any other news organization.
Burcu, Turkey is not Iran, right? I mean, Turkey is a much freer country. You can make the argument for the kind of journalism that Kelly does in a very repressed authoritarian regime, but certainly Turkey is very different. I mean, what can a site like 140 journalists do that the mainstream media cannot do?
Well, many things. But, I mean, Turkey is not Iran, but it's a very, very polarized country. And the amount of resources that go into pro-government coverage versus, the other side, however you name it, it's not really black and white, but is really, I mean, there's a huge gap between the two. So I think for a group like 140 Journals, there are really two big goals. One is, how can you really hack out of that polarization and, report on something that is objective? It's kind of
Does
ironic.
140 journalists think of itself as an objective, nonpartisan?
Yes,
Yeah.
and they would make it. That's That's a big, important principle in their work, even though they would also add that, they're not journalists because of the way that journalism is.
So they're not journalists, but they're better than journalists.
Well, I mean, it's funny because, the country dynamics affect.
And yet they call themselves 140 journalists.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay.
Yes. But it's not journalists, right? It's journos because they're not really.
Oh,
there.
140
It's kind of-
journos.
Yeah, it's kind of interesting how we position ourselves in that media environment, and rejecting professional journalism on the one hand, but then embracing all the practices that we teach here at the journalism school, like trying to give voice to every side of the story, being nonpartisan. So in that sense, one goal is, to hack out of that polarization, and the other is really to cover stories that are underreported. Environmental stories, different ethnic and religious groups, coverage of Kurdish issue, and doing that not just people who are reporting from, Istanbul, but, doing it with the help of people who are on the ground and who just think that their issues are important.
So what seems to be emerging here are sort of hybrids. Each of you represent a sort of hybrid of something or other. So maybe I'll go around the panel here and ask you to describe very succinctly what that hybrid is, and why is it better than the old journalism, and what are its challenges?
Well, I think, as I said in the beginning, it does offer
So what is your hybrid?
Well,
What creature are you?
four-legged humans.
You talked about a digital foreign correspondent. What is that?
Well, it is a foreign correspondent who's there on the scene and will report from on the ground, but also someone who takes advantage of what these digital tools can give you, so including hearing more different voices and having more diverse sources, getting information that you wouldn't get yourself because you cannot be in every place around the same time. Finding sources that you probably wouldn't find otherwise because your immediate network and the people you know might not get you to these people.
So in the old days, before social media, what foreign correspondents did was they talked to a lot of people, read all the local language newspapers and talked to it. Is it fundamentally the same except that the means by which you get this information is different?
There is similarity, but there is more to it.
What is that more? What is the plus
Well,
here?
let's see, you're not just reading the local media. You can find sources online that you wouldn't find on the ground because you're limited by what you can find on the ground.
Right, so you're no longer limited by geography.
You're not limited by
But
geography.
there were telephones even in the old days.
Well, how do you find people's numbers?
Yeah, okay, right. So this one is you get a stream of information that you don't actually go out and gather yourself.
And
That's
it
one
gives you a
difference.
better understanding of the scene.
It can also give you much more confusion.
Because in many places, in many of these countries where foreign correspondents have to operate, the media might not be free. So reading the newspapers and the local media is not going to be helpful to give you a very good understanding of what's happening. But by going online, you get a chance. Sure, there is censorship online, but you definitely get more diverse set of voices and a wider understanding of the country and its issues than by just reading the local media and talking to the few people that you can access because of the limitations on your geography and your surroundings.
So it's the volume and range of information that would otherwise not have been possible to access in the old days.
Yes.
Jessie, you are straddling this gray zone between journalism and advocacy, and that's a different kind of hybrid. So tell us more.
Okay. Well, yeah, like I said, I work in PR, right? I'm like the communications arm of Human Rights Watch, and yet what I do is not that different from what I did as a journalist in a lot of ways. We make videos, and we collaborate with these researchers to go out in the field and interview people who are victims of human rights abuses, to document war crimes in some cases. So what's the hybrid? We are advocating for change. We want something to happen with these videos, or with all the products, all that we're putting out, our reports. We want, civilians to be protected. We always want a result. And so that's the difference. I guess, between traditional journalism. In writing and thinking about this a lot, I questioned, well, what is traditional journalism? It's really different in the UK than it is in the US. And this idea of sort of a neutral, objective journalism has really been called into question. Anyway, we know that people are coming at everything from different points of view. So I kind of question, really, this idea of pure journalism without advocacy. And I talked to a lot of photographers and journalists about this, people who are working more and more in advocacy, not just because there may be some good gigs in the advocacy, but also because they want to make change. They actually want to see their work make a change. And to me, that's not really that different from like a beat reporter covering a covering city council and uncovering some kind of corruption.
Well, there is a difference. The beat reporter doesn't say, this is wrong and doesn't make recommendations.
Really? Well, no, I think the beat reporter, I think a newspaper would cover that to death. And then once there's a city council hearing where, they're going to make this change, they're going to and I think that's almost like, okay, yeah, they're not in a room negotiating exactly what the prescriptive plan is to remedy what's gone wrong. But I guess that
and traditionally there has been this,
Right.
this wall between
Absolutely.
the editorial section and the news section
Yeah.
of the newspaper, right?
Yeah.
But there is no such wall in Human Rights Watch.
Absolutely not. I mean, it's definitely a blending. And something that I feel a little bit weird about that we're trying to do a little bit more is to put sort of the perpetrator side of the story, the government side of the story, in the piece. And I feel like it isn't journalism. It is something different. But what is journalism now? I mean, that's a bigger question. We're talking about these amazing changes that this whole industry is going through. So,
What about the standards?
Oh, our standards?
Mm-hmm.
Well, I mean, I think it's a little different actually in some ways, just because, like looking at this Egypt report that we did on the massacre in Cairo, I mean, they talked to so many people over so much time. So it's like really, really in-depth investigative reporting, which not a lot of news organizations have the money for anymore. But so it's more like building a case in some ways. So many interviews.
So are we seeing a
over time.
world where advocacy groups have more people on the ground, more boots on the ground, and more money to do this kind of reporting that in the previous era news organizations did?
I mean, I think when it comes to investigative reporting, maybe. Although I see there are new things bubbling up that are exciting. I don't know, what do you think, Ahmed?
Well, I think, as you said, what we have now is that we have a new breed of organizations. They're non-profit, but they're doing journalism like ProPublica and others. And, some might say that, they have an advocacy side to them, that the stories that ProPublica does, they expose government practices in a certain way, or they focus on issues that don't get the same kind of coverage. So there's certainly blurring in the lines there between, pure journalism and advocacy. But it's about, how are they approaching their work and what are their standards? If ProPublica is doing a story about, government abuses, but they hold themselves to the same standards that all major journalism organizations do, is there anything wrong with that?
Well, there is a difference. I mean, ProPublica doesn't send a delegation to the presidential palace like
No,
Human Rights Watch does
absolutely.
and says and demand the release of this political prisoner or, information in this. It's a little bit different, right?
Yeah, and
I mean,
think
the methods may be the same, but certainly the objectives are different.
that's
in
right.
other ways, yeah.
That's right. And I think, but I do think it's interesting that I see people, especially who cover war, feeling like they do want to kind of get in there, and eventually sometimes they become advocates because they've seen so much.
Let me just point out that in Burcu's case, it's the reverse. It's the mainstream media that are seen as partisan.
Yeah.
and advocates, and so you need a nonpartisan, independent.
I think, in terms of hybridity, I would say 140 Journalists is an institutional hybrid in the sense that, like, what it's trying to do is, like, quite traditional, by the standards that we're discussing here. But institutionally, rather than having an editorial team and a set of reporters, it's really trying to distribute those roles through a network of people who may or may not see their, outputs as news or journalism. But it has its own challenges in terms of, the usuals like verification, etc. But also in terms of how to make that sustainable and how to give people the sense that what they are doing is in the end, or will be.
You don't pay your reporters?
No. But, I mean, we don't have, like, card-carrying reporters.
Right, yeah. So speaking of challenges, Kelly, you've survived all this time with a lot of challenges. So
Yes.
talk about some of that.
The challenges is our money. I mean, I feel less hindered by the Iranian government than I do by, I mean, it's kind of harsh to say, you get censored in the West by what gets funded and what doesn't get funded. The truth is that, I think when you're Iranian and you have other Iranians that are covering Iran, there is still this stigma in the United States that you can't be an objective reporter. You have to only be covering one side. You must not be getting the other side. You must not be doing it properly. And because of that, I think a lot of the foundations in the United States just kind of want to stay away from it. And in Europe, they do seem more open-minded, but they also think that the way to have impact is to empower journalists in Iran who are reporting in Farsi, but there's so many people reporting in Farsi, the BBC Persian service, Radio Farda, VOA, and just like billions of others, and it's all Farsi, and it's all caught into this bubble that nobody except the same people, ever get to hear. And anyone who wants to come and say, look, let's do it in English because that's how you hold, someone powerful like the Iranian regime to account for its actions. But for some reason, again, that's just a common sense that they don't get. So, it's money.
All right, I'd like to open up the discussion to the rest of you here in the audience. We have a microphone here. Please come up to the center of the room and tell us who you are, and feel free to ask a question.
Hi, everyone. Camilo Vargas. I work for Latino USA on a national show on NPR, and I was part of the original class that got the conversation going with Professor Cooper. My biggest underlying question, as briefly as scholar of journalism and then as a journalist, is for you, is regarding objectivity when you are not from the nationality that you're covering. And you guys briefly mentioned this, your credibility as a, say, Latin American covering conflict in Latin America in the United States. The question that I want to ask you guys is, do you think that new media is changing or has the possibility to change the way that the West is covered and that the West is seen by the rest of the world? Because I think the underlying assumption here is that, the West and especially the US has a free media culture. And so I'm wondering if there's other experiences that you guys equate to what you're doing elsewhere here in the US or in the West.
So the question is, how is social media changing perceptions of the West?
Yes, or new media,
or new
countries media
or
digital outlets here. I'm thinking about WikiLeaks at a certain point, Edward Snowden, The Interceptor, all this sort of all these new forms of journalism that are digital that might be, opening up new discussions in the West and the way that the West is perceived elsewhere.
I think if anything, it's made everyone more paranoid. They already think everything is a plot and nothing has its own life. There always has to be something going on in the background. And, a Snowden story, 9/11, all of that, feeds into that paranoia. So unfortunately, in the short run, that's all I've been able to perceive.
I think, in the Middle East, for example, I don't think the U.S. And U.S. politics, for example, gets covered as much as local politics. That makes sense. You're concerned more with your own problems and surroundings, but there's a lot of interest in U.S. foreign policy and how it's affecting politics and what's happening in the region. So the focus is more about on U.S. foreign policy than life in the U.S. and how, Middle Eastern countries see the United States, because the way most of these countries and people in these countries see the United States is through their foreign policy and how it's affecting them more than what's happening in the U.S. itself.
Exactly.
I think what's happening in the United States is, in their view, seen on satellite television, soap operas, Hollywood movies. So that's kind of more their idea of what goes on in America.
Yes, please. Yeah.
Rutvich Devashe, a student here in MS. My question is that it's romantic to pack your bags and go to Middle East or to Africa. But if you want to be a serious foreign correspondent, would you specifically, I think Ahmed and Golnoush, you can probably give some example or give advice, I guess. Is it to your strength to go back to your own country or your own culture rather than just going somewhere? And is it easier or is it, I think it's kind of along the same line of questioning, but is it easier or is it harder to go back and do foreign correspondence for other outlets?
I'd land in jail, and I couldn't do much from there, so I have no choice.
Okay.
Well, I think
You went back.
I did go back, and that was always my plan, that I always wanted to go back, because one of the reasons why I wanted to come to the journalism school here and learn is because as I was in the country, blogging from there and reading how the international media was covering Saudi Arabia, I was getting really frustrated with their coverage because I thought many of it was superficial and not getting to the real issues in the same way that Kelly saw how Iran is being covered. And so I saw myself as someone who's probably better placed and better positioned to report on the country because I'm from there, I speak the language, I know the culture, and I'm more likely to understand it than a foreigner who would, get parachuted there and, are expected to write about it. Is there something romantic about the foreign correspondent who go to new places and do that? Sure, there is that allure. But I think as a local, you have that advantage that foreign correspondents who come there don't have. Now, we come to the issue of perspective and how an outsider see the country compared to someone who's from inside. And that takes a lot of effort. So me as a local, I'm always, thinking of that, some of the things that I see as a local and take for granted or think of them are as normal might not be normal or regular to outsiders. And I need to always think of that as I do my reporting and write my stories. But because I work with foreign editors, that's always in the equation. They will come and ask me questions and I will have answers to them based on what I see. But sometimes these questions will let me think about things in a way that I didn't think about before.
But Burcu, you're also more vulnerable, right?
Yeah, I was going to jump in. I think, people like Ahmed who, are local but also really proficient in understanding how, foreign journalism should be practiced are really bringing a unique perspective to international news coverage. That said, in Turkey, and we were actually talking about it before, I think one of the best coverage of Turkey, even for Turkish people, comes from foreign publications. But when it comes to governments attacking journalists, those citizens of the country who also report on the abuses of their governments
more at risk.
Very quickly become the target, and not just symbolically, but quite substantively. Speaking of digital tools, mostly on social media, slandering, compromising their sources and reporting, and becomes an advantage very quickly becomes a disadvantage or a threat even for the foreign correspondent.
So you have it both ways. You're better equipped, but also more vulnerable. Yeah. Yes, please.
Twitter is very fast-paced. If you are reporting on conflict, like something happening that's Arab Spring related, for example, how quick are you to tweet an observation that could have a negative impact or implications? Do you personally prefer to be the first to tweet about it and live tweet if you're there at the scene, or do you prefer to wait until after the fact to ensure that there aren't negative implications that shouldn't have been that way or perceived that way?
Right. Who wants to answer that? What goes on in your mind before you put out those 140 characters?
I have an easy answer. If I don't have a reason to tweet, I'm not going to tweet. So in 2009, I turned to Twitter when the government took our website down so we wouldn't continue to report. And so I started reporting, and I would not limit myself to 140 characters. So I continued, quote, end quote, paraphrased. And this is information that I was putting up on the website as a live blog, but now that I didn't have my website, then I could just put it on Twitter. And because it was coming from people that I trusted, I didn't have to worry about that. I wasn't tweeting other people that I didn't know randomly. And since then, it has become more of an echo chamber. Whenever I go to see what people are tweeting on Iran, they're just tapping each other on the back. And so it's, I don't get into it. I'm not going to get into it unless I have a reason. Like during the past election, when I had somebody who was privy to the numbers as the polls were coming in, we were just like the first or one of the first to report it because I had that. So if I have a reason or if I have an interesting take on something, then I'll tweet it or I'll link to another website and say this is interesting, but it's interesting how. So otherwise, why do it?
I think the old rule applies. You always want to be right, not first. Doesn't matter if you got first, but you got it wrong. So you want to be careful about that. If you're on the scene and you saw something, you can confidently tweet it because you did see it yourself. But if you're retweeting others, you might want to be more careful about what are you retweeting. So, don't retweet things that look suspicious or you don't, from sources that you don't trust. And we've seen it happening over and over that, someone would tweet something that is not correct and it would get retweeted very quickly. And unfortunately, Twitter doesn't have a good way to correct or edit things like that. So mistakes
Mistakes happen, and they do happen.
They do happen, and unfortunately they reproduce very quickly
Yes,
on a medium like Twitter.
And they go viral very fast.
And we do talk about this in the report I wrote about what happens with mistakes and corrections. It is still a challenge, but as I said, you want to be careful about that. You want to tweet what you are sure about. You don't want to rush to something just because everyone is talking about it and you want to be first. Doesn't matter if you're first and you got it wrong.
All right. Can we have the next
Thank you.
question, please? Yeah. Oh, by the way, 140 Journos is named after the 140 characters,
Yes,
right?
yes,
Yeah.
not because we have 140 people.
Hi, I'm a student at the school. I'm just curious, I'm amazed by the fact that you can start a foreign correspondence bureau from the living room, essentially building contact through social network. My question is, you're doing that because sometimes you're not able to get there, or they don't let foreign correspondents in. And there's a reason for that. A lot of times people will get into trouble if they talk to journalists. So I wonder, you don't see these people. One is, how do you ensure that they are telling you the truth? And then two is, how do you protect them? Because we could be getting them into trouble, and that could be ruining their entire life.
How do you protect your correspondents, not just your sources? Yeah.
By not naming them, Iran, unlike Turkey, you can't turn on your location, and say, I'm here, you can't pick up the phone and call someone and say, hey, what's happening? So by not naming them, by not using, I don't even necessarily communicate with them through email anymore. Ever since Gmail was hacked by the Iranian government a few years ago, no one uses Gmail anymore. So it keeps shifting. It keeps shifting to different places. And you kind of stay on top of what the Iranian government can possibly do with the help of the Chinese government or the Russian government, and you're aware of that, and you try to kind of stay away from that. And I think because we don't use cameras, we don't use video, it's just, it's just the pen and paper, or, it's easy, it's much easier to stay under the radar. And knock on wood, as far as I know, like, we're the only place that hasn't had anyone in trouble. Every other news organization has. We haven't, so we're doing something right. But, one of the reasons I don't like to go into detail about how I know them and how I've gotten to know them and how I've developed my relationships with them, which ones I've met, which ones, it's, because I obviously don't want to do it. I don't want to blow, their cover, or even indicate that it might be somebody that it's not. So you have to, it's just like any other news organization where, they hire someone and they trust them and they nurture them, and I have to do the same. I have to, depending on how I meet them, how I'm put in touch with them, what their level of reporting is. Like, sometimes it's just really easy to, most of what comes through just is at a substandard level, and I don't even have to bother with it. So I don't have to spend my days like thinking, oh, do I trust this person? Just the reporting's so bad that even if I trusted them, they're not saying anything. So it's, I think when you're parachuting, when you're covering the whole world or a region, it is difficult to know who to trust. But when you're focused on one thing and you're from that culture, it's so much easier to pick up on credibility, on someone's intelligence, their level of truthfulness. And when a story comes, that's not the story that we publish. We have to fact check, we have to do more reporting. Sometimes I assign other people that I've been working with to do their own parallel reporting. During something like the protest, when you have a lot of people in different neighborhoods, one of the reasons that the information from one person can differ from another is because maybe there's a demonstration here, but there's other person who's somewhere else, there is nothing going on. So the more people you have, the more they can complement each other or raise a red flag that you then investigate and not use. So I end up working with, I don't work with a lot of people, and there's a lot of people that a lot of other places trust that I don't trust. So again, it hasn't been an issue.
Yes, sure.
Hi, I was born in Brazil, and I'm a student here. And I cover professional tennis, and Twitter is my favorite social media tool. But talking about digital media, there's so many other tools out there. And why do you think Twitter is the most important? Because that's what you all talk about. You're not talking about the other.
Is Twitter the most important, and why? That's the question.
That's the question.
All right, quickly. Is Twitter the most important for you, and why?
We do talk in the report about this. You need to know what is the most popular social network or digital tool in a place, when you report on it. So Twitter is huge in Saudi Arabia, as I mentioned earlier, but it might not be in Brazil, for example. So Facebook might be more popular in Egypt than in other places. So as you report your story, you want to look at the right tool and the right network where the conversation...
Or Instagram in Hong Kong
or
at the moment,
Instagram in
yes.
Hong Kong or in other places. So Twitter is popular in many places, but there are always exceptions, and every story probably will need you to look at its specifics and what's in there for it.
In terms of journalism, I think Twitter is the most important. Like, for example, in 2009, as many people have said, it wasn't a Twitter revolution because people weren't tweeting from Tehran, but that's not the point. The point is, like, right now, about everyone I know, every Iranian I know is on Facebook. everyone, maybe 2 people have taken down their profile, but everyone in the Islamic Republic of Iran and probably even in the diaspora is on Facebook. But you're only going to have access to their Twitter feeds and to the information if they're your friends. And the YouTube videos you're going to learn about or see are going to come a lot of times through the Facebook news feed. But because Twitter is public, because unless you don't want it to be, and because other journalists have learned to be on Twitter, that's where they have their listening posts, and they can do hashtag searches, or they can just do searches. That's how they can kind of like swoop in on a story very quickly, and because and that's how you're going to link to YouTube videos or Instagram or other things. So I think it's social media pared down to the minimum, and it's the cross section of others. So I think in that way it's very significant.
All right, thank you. I'm sorry, but we have to bring this panel to an end. I'm getting frantic signals from the back of the room. Thank you very much to our panelists. Thank you to Ann Cooper for putting this report together. The Tao Center for making this event possible. And again, Brent is at the back of the room for any of you who want to know more about the journalism school. Thank you very much, everyone, for being here. For being here, not being there.